At 75, Eleanor didn't lose her home. She was quietly removed from it. No shouting, no slammed doors, just a thin envelope, a firm knock, and two men who spoke in the careful, distant tone reserved for people already considered gone. Ms. Whitaker, one of them said, not unkindly, but not warmly either. We're here to finalize the transfer. Eleanor stood in the doorway of the house she had lived in for 42 years. The same doorway where she once watched her husband carrying groceries, where her son had run out laughing with untied shoes. Now, strangers stood there holding papers that said none of it belonged to her anymore. She didn't ask them to come in. Is there a mistake? She asked, her voice steady in a way that surprised even her. The second man glanced at his clipboard. The property was placed under review after the estate adjustment. You were notified. I was notified, she repeated softly. I just didn't understand what that meant. A pause. The first man shifted his weight. You'll need to vacate today. Today. The word didn't echo. It's settled, heavy and final. Behind them, a woman from the legal office stepped forward, heels clicking against the pavement like punctuation marks. We try to reach you, Ms. Whitaker, she said. But without a formal response, the claim defaulted. Eleanor looked at her. I buried my husband 6 months ago. I'm sorry for your loss, the woman replied quickly. Then, almost as an afterthought, but the process still applies. Of course it did. Processes always did. Eleanor nodded once. Not in agreement, but in recognition. This wasn't a conversation she could win. May I have an hour? She asked. The men exchanged a glance. The first one gave a small nod. An hour. That was how long it took to erase a life. She didn't pack much. A suitcase. A few clothes. A photograph she didn't look at. The rest, furniture, books, dishes, remained exactly where they were, as if someone might return and need them. At the door, she paused. Not to cry, just to remember how it felt to stand inside and belong. Then she stepped out and closed it behind her. No one stopped her. No one said goodbye. The woman in heels signed something. One of the men locked the door. The sound was small, clean, final. Eleanor stood on the sidewalk, suitcase in hand, as they spoke around her. She didn't contest it. One asked quietly. Didn't respond. The other said, happens more than you think. Eleanor almost smiled. Happens more than you think. She turned and walked away before they could say anything else. The county records office smelled like paper and time. Eleanor sat in a hard chair, her suitcase by her feet, waiting for a clerk who had already called her name twice before realizing she hadn't left. Ms. Whitaker, the young man said again, approaching her desk. I think there's something you should see. She looked up slowly. I don't believe there's anything left to see. He hesitated, then slid a thin file across the desk. This wasn't included in the main transfer. It's listed under residual holdings. Probably an oversight. Eleanor didn't touch it at first. What is it? He glanced at the file. A property. Coastal. He paused, searching for the right word. Unclaimed. She let out a quiet breath. Unwanted, you mean? He didn't correct her. They couldn't sell it, he said instead. It's been sitting there for years. Structurally unsound. Off the active registry. Eleanor finally placed her hand on the file. The paper was thin, almost weightless. A house, she asked. A villa, he said. Technically. She let the words sit between them. Villa. It sounded too grand for something no one wanted. Why wasn't it included? She asked. The clerk gave a small, uncertain shrug. No one claimed it. And no one asked. Eleanor nodded. That made sense. She opened the file. A single page. An address. A faded photograph of a large, weather-worn structure perched at the edge of the sea. Beautiful once. Forgotten now. People don't stay there. The clerk added, almost casually. Eleanor closed the file. That's all right, she said. She stood, lifting her suitcase with one hand and the thin document with the other. For the first time that day, her voice carried something different. Not hope, not yet, but direction. It hasn't had the chance to ask me to leave. And with that, Eleanor Whitaker walked out of the office, toward the only place left in the world that hadn't already decided she didn't belong. That night, Eleanor learned something no one ever says out loud. You don't feel homeless when you lose a house. You feel homeless when you realize there's nowhere left that remembers you. The bus station lights hummed above her, too bright for sleep, too cold for comfort. Eleanor sat on a metal bench with her suitcase tucked between her shoes, as if someone might take even that if she let out of sight. Across from her, a man lay stretched across 3 seats, his coat pulled over his face. A woman near the vending machine counted coins twice before walking away with nothing. No one asked questions here. That was the rule. Eleanor kept her hands folded in her lap, her posture straight, as though she were still waiting in a place where dignity mattered. A voice broke the silence. First night, she turned her head slightly. The man across from her had pushed his coat back just enough to look at her. His eyes weren't curious, just certain. Eleanor hesitated. Yes, she said. He nodded once, like that confirmed something he already knew. Don't sleep too deep, he said. They come through around 3. Security, sometimes worse. She blinked. Worse. He pulled the coat back over his face. People who know you're new. The words settled heavier than the air. Eleanor looked down at her hands. They were clean, still steady, still hers. But for the first time, they didn't seem to belong anywhere. She didn't sleep. Not really. Her eyes closed, but her mind kept walking through the house she had left behind. The hallway, the kitchen window that stuck in the winter, the faint mark on the wall where her husband had once missed a nail. Not memories, coordinates, proof that she had existed somewhere. Around 2 in the morning, she opened her eyes again. The lights hadn't changed. The people hadn't moved much. Time here didn't pass. It lingered. Eleanor reached into her coat pocket and pulled out the folded paper from earlier. The villa. She didn't open it. Not yet, because once she did, it would be real. And if it was real, it meant this bench, this place, was no longer temporary. It was the space between 2 lives. You waiting for someone? The question came from a woman sitting a few seats down. Middle-aged, tired eyes, a plastic bag looped around her wrist like it was the only thing anchoring her. Eleanor shook her head. No. The woman studied her for a moment. You don't look like you belong here. Eleanor almost smiled. I used to belong somewhere, she said quietly. Yeah, the woman replied. We all did. A beat passed. Family, the woman asked. Eleanor looked straight ahead. I had one. The woman nodded, as if that was enough to answer enough. It usually was. Sometimes, the woman said after a moment, it's not losing the house that gets you. Eleanor turned slightly. It's realizing no one's coming to get you back. The words didn't break her. They just fit. By the time the sky outside began to pale, Eleanor had made her decision. Not because she believed in the villa, but because she couldn't stay where nothing moved forward. She stood slowly, joints stiff, dignity intact. The man across from her lowered his coat again. Are you heading out? Yes. Got somewhere to go. Eleanor held up the folded paper. I have an address. He studied her for a moment, then gave a small nod. That's more than most. She adjusted her grip on the suitcase. It's probably nothing, she said. He shrugged. Nothing's still better than this. Eleanor looked around one last time, not at the people, but at the space. The quiet understanding. The absence of expectation. Then she said something she didn't fully understand until it left her lips. It was the worst decision I could make. The man raised an eyebrow. Eleanor gave a faint, almost invisible smile. And the only one I have left. Outside, the morning air was colder than she expected. The world looked the same. Cars passed. People walked with purpose. Coffee shops opened their doors like nothing had shifted. But Eleanor knew better. Everything had shifted. She stepped onto the sidewalk, the folded paper now open in her hand. An address. A place no one wanted. A place no one stayed. She looked at it for a long moment, then folded it carefully and placed it back in her pocket. Not with hope. Not yet. But with something steadier. A quiet refusal to disappear where she was not seen. And then, without looking back, Eleanor Whitaker began walking toward the only place left that hadn't already decided who she was. The road to the villa ended long before the address said it would. The bus driver slowed, glanced at the paper in Eleanor's hand, then looked back at her through the mirror. This is as far as I go, he said. Eleanor studied the empty stretch ahead. No houses, no shops, just a narrow road bending toward the sound of the ocean somewhere out of sight. The address continues, she said calmly. The driver shrugged. Road doesn't. A few passengers glanced at her, then quickly away. No one offered help. No one asked questions. Eleanor nodded once. Thank you. She stepped off the bus, her suitcase landing softly against the gravel. The doors hissed shut behind her, and within seconds, the bus was gone. Silence took its place. Not peaceful silence, the kind that waits. The walk wasn't long, but it felt longer than anything she had done in years. The wind grew stronger the closer she got to the coast, pulling at her coat, tangling her hair, as if the land itself was testing whether she meant to stay. Then she saw it. The villa stood at the edge of a low cliff, facing the open sea like it had been placed there on purpose, and then forgotten. Once, it must have been beautiful. Tall windows, wide stone steps, a long balcony that stretched across the front like an outstretched arm. Now, the windows were clouded. The wood along the frame had darkened with age. The railing leaned slightly, as if tired of holding itself up. Eleanor stopped walking, not because she was afraid, but because she understood something immediately. No one had come here in a long time, and no one had come back. You're not planning on going in there, are you? The voice came from behind her. Eleanor turned to see an older man standing near a rusted fence a short distance away, arms crossed, expression unreadable. I believe I am, she said. He let out a short breath, almost a laugh. People don't stay there. Eleanor glanced back at the house. So I've heard. They say it's unstable, he continued. Structure's off. Doors swell. Windows jam. Things don't sit right. Things rarely do, Eleanor replied. The man studied her more closely now. You alone? Yes. He nodded slowly, as if that answered more than she said. Then listen carefully, he said. If you go in, don't expect it to feel empty. Eleanor met his gaze. What does that mean? The man hesitated, then shook his head. It means no one who's tried to live there stayed long enough to explain it. A pause. Suit yourself, he muttered, turning away. Just don't say no one warned you. The front steps creaked under her weight, though they held. The door was heavier than she expected. For a moment, she simply stood there, her hand resting against the wood. 42 years in one home. Now this. No ceremony. No welcome. Just a threshold. Eleanor turned the handle. It opened without resistance. The air inside was still. Not stale. Not damp. Just untouched. Dust lay across most surfaces, but not evenly. Some areas were thick with it. Others almost clean, as though time had passed around them instead of through them. Eleanor stepped inside slowly, her shoes echoing softly against the wooden floor. The main room stretched wide, with a high ceiling and a large window facing the ocean. The light filtered in, pale and steady, illuminating more absence than presence. She set her suitcase down near the wall. It felt deliberate. She couldn't explain why. Her eyes moved across the room. A chair near the window, perfectly angled toward the sea. Not crooked, not shifted, placed. A table in the center, dust-covered, except for a single circle in the middle, as if something had once rested there and been lifted away without disturbing anything else. Eleanor stepped closer. She ran her fingers lightly across the surface. Dust, except for that one space. Clean. Behind her, a window creaked softly. Eleanor turned. It had opened slightly, just enough for the wind to slip through. She stared at it, then at the frame. No rot, no resistance. It shouldn't have moved that easily. Eleanor walked slowly through the room again, this time not as someone entering a ruin, but as someone being observed. She stopped in the center of the floor, listened. Nothing. And yet, not empty. She spoke, her voice quiet but steady. Who lived here? The house didn't answer, but it didn't ignore her either. Eleanor exhaled slowly, then nodded to herself. This wasn't abandoned, she said. Her eyes moved once more across the room. The chair, the table, the window. It was left waiting, and for the first time since she lost everything. Eleanor Whitaker wasn't standing in a place that rejected her. She was standing in a place that hadn't decided yet. The first thing Eleanor learned about the villa was this. It responded to patience. Not force, not fear, patience. She didn't sleep much that first night. Not because she was afraid, but because the house didn't feel like something you could ignore. The wind moved through it in soft, measured breaths. Floorboards shifted, not sharply but subtly, like a structure adjusting itself instead of breaking down. Eleanor sat in the same chair by the window she had noticed earlier. It felt natural to sit there. That bothered her more than anything else. "You don't belong to me," she said quietly into the dim room. The words sounded firm, but not convincing. Morning came slowly. A pale line of light stretched across the floor, moving inch by inch as the sun rose over the ocean. Eleanor watched it from the chair, her hands resting calmly in her lap. Then something caught her attention. The light didn't spread randomly. It narrowed, focused, until it rested on a single section of the far wall. A precise rectangle, clean, undisturbed. Eleanor frowned slightly. "That's not a chance," she murmured. She stood, her joints stiff but steady, and walked toward it. The wall looked like the rest. Aged wood, slightly warped, nothing remarkable. But the light held there, as if pointing. Eleanor hesitated only for a moment before reaching out. Her fingers pressed gently against the surface. Nothing. She applied a little more pressure. Still nothing. She exhaled. "Of course," she whispered. "Why would it be that simple?" She stepped back. I looked again. The light. The angle. The chair. Eleanor turned slowly and walked back to the chair. She sat down. Waited. Watched. The light shifted again just slightly. This time, it aligned not just with the wall, but with her. Her position. A quiet realization settled in. "This house," she said under her breath, "doesn't react to movement. It reacts to presence." She stood again, more carefully this time. Moved one step to the left. The light shifted. One step to the right. It followed. Not randomly. Not fully. Just enough to suggest adjustment. Eleanor looked back at the wall, then at the chair. Then slowly, deliberately, she returned to the exact position she had been sitting in before. The light aligned again. Perfectly. She didn't rush this time. She walked back to the wall and placed her hand where the light met the wood. Then, instead of pushing, she rested her palm flat. Waited. A soft click, so faint she almost missed it. Eleanor's breath caught. The wood beneath her hand shifted slightly. Not opening, not breaking, just releasing. A narrow seam appeared. Not visible before. Not forced. Revealed. Eleanor stepped back, her eyes fixed on the thin line, now tracing part of the wall. Her voice was barely above a whisper. That wasn't there. Carefully, she reached again, this time following the seam with her fingers. A small section of the panel gave way, opening just enough to reveal a shallow compartment hidden inside. No dust, no decay, preserved. Inside was a single object, a folded piece of paper, yellowed with age, but untouched by the wear surrounding it. Eleanor didn't grab it immediately. She stared at it, as if it might disappear if she moved too quickly. "Someone wanted this found," she said quietly. "Not hidden, not buried. Found." She reached in and lifted the paper with careful hands. It felt fragile, important, like something that had been waiting longer than she had. Eleanor unfolded it slowly. No name, no date, just a single line, written in steady, deliberate handwriting. "If you are here, then you already understand more than the others." Eleanor read it twice, then a third time. Her chest tightened, not with fear, but with something deeper. Recognition. "The others," she repeated softly. Her eyes moved back to the wall, to the chair, to the path of the light. "They tried to open it," she said. "They just didn't listen." Eleanor folded the paper again, more carefully than before. For the first time since she stepped into the villa, her expression changed. Not confusion, no doubt, something steadier. "This wasn't left behind," she said quietly. Her gaze lifted, scanning the room with new awareness. It was left for someone who would stay long enough to notice. The house remained silent, but no longer felt uncertain. It felt selective. And Eleanor Whitaker, standing alone in a place no one else would choose, had just become the first person to be acknowledged. By the second morning, Eleanor stopped asking whether the house was strange. The better question was, what did it expect from her? She stood in the center of the main room, the folded note resting in her palm. The words echoed in her mind. If you are here, then you already understand more than the others. I don't, she said aloud, her voice steady but honest. Not yet. The house offered no correction, only quiet. Eleanor began with something simple. She cleaned, not out of habit but intention. She moved slowly, deliberately, as if each action mattered. Dust came away in soft gray clouds, revealing wood that hadn't rotted so much as weighted. The table first. She wiped it evenly, stopping when she reached the circle that had already been clean. She didn't disturb it. Some things aren't meant to be corrected, she murmured. Then the chair. She adjusted it without thinking, just slightly aligning it with the window. The moment she let go, a faint shift moved through the room. Not sound, not movement, a presence recalibrating. Eleanor stilled. You noticed that, she said quietly. She turned toward the window. It was half open again, not blown wide by the wind, not rattling. Placed. The curtain moved in a slow, controlled rhythm, as if the air itself had boundaries. Eleanor stepped closer. You open when I don't touch you, she said, studying the frame. But not fully. She reached out and opened it the rest of the way. The wind rushed in harder now, sharper, less measured. The curtain snapped. The room felt wrong. Eleanor frowned. Then, slowly, she closed the window back to where it had been. The air softened. The curtains settled. The room exhaled. She stepped back. This isn't broken, she said. It's specific. The realization didn't frighten her. It steadied her. For the first time in months, maybe longer, Eleanor wasn't reacting to something being taken away. She was learning something that revealed itself only if she paid attention. She returned to the wall panel and opened the hidden compartment again. Inside, beneath where the note had rested, she noticed something she hadn't before. A thin metal strip embedded into the back of the compartment. Not visible at first glance. Not decorative. Functional. Eleanor leaned closer. There were markings, faint, almost worn away. Measurements. Angles. A system, she whispered. Not a hidden room. Not a single secret. A structure designed to respond. She stepped away and turned slowly, taking in the entire room again. The chair, the table, the window, the angle of the light. Each one placed with purpose. Not randomly arranged, but connected. Who built this? She asked quietly. Her voice didn't echo. It settled. Eleanor walked to the far side of the room and paused near the fireplace. Cold, unused, but clean. Too clean. She crouched slightly, brushing her fingers along the edge. No ash, no residue, but the stone beneath her hand felt warmer than it should. She pulled back, startled, not in fear but in surprise. That's not possible, she said under her breath. She sat back in a chair, slower this time, thinking, not reacting. This house doesn't watch, she said after a long moment. Her voice was calm now. Certain. It responds. The difference mattered. Watching meant observation. Responding meant relationship. Eleanor leaned forward, resting her elbows lightly on her knees. You're not waiting for someone to find you, she said. Her eyes moved across the room, sharper now, more focused. You're waiting for someone to live the right way inside you. A faint sound followed. A soft, almost imperceptible shift near the wall behind her. Eleanor turned her head. Another panel, smaller this time, had moved just enough to reveal a dark edge beneath it. She didn't rush toward it. She didn't even stand. She just watched. A slow breath left her lips. All right, she said quietly. Not afraid, not overwhelmed, but acknowledged. Eleanor Whitaker sat alone in a house no one else would choose. And for the first time since she lost everything, she wasn't being pushed out. She was being answered. And somewhere within the structure of wood and silence, something had shifted, not because she forced it open, but because she had finally begun to understand how to stay. By the third day, Eleanor stopped treating the villa like a place to survive. She treated it like something to understand. She didn't rush to the new panel. That would have been the old way. Force, urgency, desperation. Instead, She moved through the room the way she had learned the house preferred, quietly, deliberately, with attention. She adjusted the chair back to its precise angle, closed the window to the same measured gap, wiped the table, but again left the center circle untouched. Then she waited. Nothing happened, at least not immediately. Eleanor exhaled softly, lowering herself into the chair. "I'm not here to break you open," she said into the stillness. "If you have something to show me, I'll wait." The words didn't echo. They settled. Minutes passed, or maybe longer. Tom didn't feel structured here. Then, a low, controlled shift moved through the wall behind her. Not loud, not suddenly, but certain. Eleanor didn't turn right away. She closed her eyes briefly, steadying herself. Then she stood. The second panel had opened wider now, revealing a narrow vertical compartment hidden between the inner beams of the house. Unlike the first, this one was deeper. Intentional. Eleanor approached slowly. Inside, she saw more than just a note this time. There were objects, carefully arranged, untouched, a rolled set of architectural drawings, a small leather-bound journal, and beneath them a sealed envelope, marked only with a single word. Record. Eleanor reached in and lifted the drawings first. The paper was thick, aged but preserved. She unrolled it carefully across the table, her fingers smoothing out the edges. At first glance, it was the villa, but not as it appeared, not as anyone would build it. This version showed hidden layers, internal pathways, pressure points, structural alignments that didn't correspond to rooms, but to behavior. Her eyes moved slowly across the page, then stopped. Lines traced from the windows to the walls, from the walls to the floor, converging at points that matched where she had already stood. Already acted. I already waited. This wasn't just designed to stand, she whispered. Her voice is barely steady now. It was designed to respond. She turned the page. More markings. Angles tied to sunlight. Distances measured not in feet, but in movement. A note scribbled in the margin, barely legible. The house reveals itself only to those who live without forcing it. Eleanor leaned back slightly, her breath shallow. "They tried to open you," she said quietly. "Didn't they?" Her eyes moved back to the line from the first note. The others. She reached for the journal next. The leather creaked softly as she opened it. Inside, pages filled with tight, controlled handwriting. Not personal, not emotional. Precise. Documented. Entry 12. Subject failed to align the eastern window before attempting access. Mechanism remained locked. Entry 19. Repetition without awareness. No response triggered. Entry 27. They continue to treat the structure as an object. It will not respond. Eleanor closed the journal slowly. "They didn't understand you," she said. Her voice carried something deeper now. No pity. Recognition. Finally, she reached for the envelope. It was heavier than expected. Sealed, but not locked. She hesitated. Then I opened it. Inside, legal documents, property records, ownership transfers, names crossed out, signatures altered, entire sections marked void, then rewritten under different authorities. Eleanor's hands still. Her eyes moved quickly now, reading, connecting. "This wasn't abandoned," she whispered. Her voice tightened. "It was taken." The final page bore a statement, unsigned but deliberate. "If you are reading this, then the house has been chosen correctly. What was erased can now be restored." Eleanor lowered the papers slowly. The room felt different now. Not just responsive. Witnessing. "They erased you," she said softly. "Just like they erased me." For a long moment, she stood there in silence. Not overwhelmed. Not afraid. But no longer uncertain. This wasn't just a house with hidden compartments. It was a system designed to protect truth, to reject those who forced it, to wait for someone who understood loss, patience, and presence. Eleanor folded the documents carefully, placing them back in the compartment, but not closing it. "Not yet. They're going to come back for this," she said quietly. Not a guess. A certainty. She looked around the room. The chair, the window, the light now shifting again toward a new angle. The house wasn't finished. Not even close. And for the first time since she arrived, Eleanor Whitaker didn't feel like she had found something forgotten. She felt like she had stepped into something that had been hidden on purpose, waiting for someone who knew what it meant to be erased and still choose not to disappear. It didn't knock the first time. They announced themselves. Eleanor heard the engines before she saw the cars. Low, controlled, expensive, the kind of sound that didn't belong on a road that barely existed. She stood by the window, not hiding, not stepping back. The morning light cut across the floor the way it always did, precise, intentional, as two black SUVs came into view and stopped just short of the front steps. They found it, she said quietly. Not fear, recognition. The doors opened in sequence. 3 men stepped out, well-dressed, clean lines, no hesitation in their movement. They didn't look at the house with curiosity. They looked at it with confirmation. One of them, taller, older, adjusted his cufflinks before walking forward. He didn't rush. People like him never did. Eleanor opened the door before he reached it. It unsettled him, just slightly. "Mrs. Whitaker," he said, offering a polite nod. "I was hoping we wouldn't have to introduce ourselves under these circumstances." Eleanor held his gaze. "You've already introduced yourselves." He smiled faintly. "Have we?" "You came without knocking." The smile didn't fade, but it changed. "I'm Daniel Cross," he said, extending a hand. Eleanor didn't take it. He lowered it without comment. "I represent a private acquisition group," he continued. "We've been tracking this property for some time." "Then you're late," Eleanor replied. A brief pause. The man behind him shifted slightly. Daniel noticed. "We'd like to make you an offer," he said. Eleanor stepped aside, just enough to allow them to see inside, but not enough to invite them in. "You already made one," she said. He raised an eyebrow. "Have we?" "The clerk," Eleanor said calmly. The silence. The fact that no one claimed this place until I did. Daniel's eyes sharpened. "So?" She wasn't guessing. "May we come in?" he asked. "No." The answer was immediate, not defensive. Final. Daniel exhaled slowly, then nodded once. "Very well," he said. "Then I'll be direct." He reached into his coat and pulled out a thin folder, clean, precise, like everything else about him. "We're prepared to compensate you generously for the property," he said, "more than its current condition would suggest." Eleanor glanced at the folder, then back at him. "You're not buying the house," she said. He tilted his head slightly. "No, you're buying what's inside it." Silence. The kind that doesn't deny, only recalculates. Daniel's expression shifted just enough to confirm it. "We're buying the property," he said carefully. Eleanor shook her head. "You didn't come here for broken wood and sea air." Her voice remained calm, but there was something sharper beneath it now. "You came because something was hidden here, and now you think I've found it." The man behind Daniel took a step forward. "Ma'am, we're trying to help you." Eleanor turned her gaze to him. "No," she said quietly. "You're trying to get ahead of me." He stopped. Daniel closed the folder slowly. "Let me be clear," he said, his tone softer now, but firmer. "This property has a complicated history. They are legal uncertainties." "I've read them," Eleanor replied. Another shift. Subtle, but real. "You shouldn't involve yourself in matters you don't fully understand," Daniel said. Eleanor held his gaze without blinking. "I understand enough to know someone erased it," she said. "And I understand even more now that you're here." The wind moved behind her, the curtain shifting slightly. The house was listening. Daniel took a step closer, not onto the porch, but near enough to lower his voice. "What you found in there," he said quietly, "doesn't belong to you." Eleanor didn't move. "It didn't belong to them either," she replied. A long pause stretched between them. Measured. Careful. Then Daniel straightened. "Name your price," he said. No pretense now. No softness. Just the truth. Eleanor looked at him. At the cars. At the men who stood like they already owned everything they touched. Then she looked back into the house. The chair. The light. The quiet system that had chosen not to open for anyone else. "You're not buying the house," she said again. Her voice was steady. "Certain. You're buying silence." Daniel didn't respond. Because this time, there was nothing left to adjust. Eleanor stepped back and closed the door. Not loudly. Not dramatically. Just completely. Outside, The men remained where they stood, waiting, calculating, planning. Inside, Eleanor rested her hand lightly against the door. Her heart was steady, not because she wasn't afraid, but because something had changed. "They're not done," she said quietly. The house didn't answer, but somewhere behind her, another mechanism shifted, soft, deliberate. And Eleanor Whitaker understood something now that she hadn't before. They weren't coming back to the house. They were coming back for the truth it refused to give them. And for the first time in a long time, she wasn't the one being pushed out. She was the one standing in the way. They didn't break in. They didn't need to. Pressure was quieter than force, and far more effective. By the next morning, Eleanor noticed the changes. A car parked farther down the road than before. Too still, too patient. Later, a different one. Same distance, same silence. Watching without looking like it. "They don't want to scare me," she said aloud, standing by the window. "They want me to doubt myself." The curtain shifted slightly, the air adjusting as if the house had heard her. Eleanor didn't leave. That was the first decision. The second was harder. She would go deeper. She returned to the hidden compartment. The documents spread across the table once more. The architectural drawings, the journal, the altered legal records. Each piece now felt less like discovery and more like responsibility. "They built you to protect something," she said quietly, "not just to hide it." Her eyes moved across the drawings again. Patterns, angles, movement tied to meaning. Then she saw it, a section she hadn't fully noticed before, marked not by lines but by absence. A space beneath the main floor. Not a basement. Something else. Access wasn't labeled. It was implied. Eleanor leaned back slightly. "You don't open all at once," she murmured. "You wait until someone understands enough." A sudden knock broke the silence. Sharp, unexpectedly. Eleanor didn't jump, but she didn't move immediately either. The knock came again, slower this time, deliberate. She walked to the door and opened it halfway. A man stood there, alone this time, younger than the others, less polished, but still part of the same world. "Mrs. Whitaker," he said. "Mr. Cross asked me to deliver something." Eleanor didn't step aside. "You can leave it there." The man hesitated, then held out a sealed envelope. "It's important." Eleanor took it without a word. He didn't leave right away. "They're serious," he said quietly. "You don't have to do this the hard way." Eleanor met his eyes. "This is the easy way," she said. He frowned. "You don't understand what you're up against." Eleanor's voice didn't rise. "I do," she said. "I just don't think they understand what they're up against." She closed the door. The envelope was heavy. Too heavy for a simple offer. Eleanor opened it at the table, her hands steady. Inside, a contract. Clean. Formal. A number written across the final page. More money than she had seen in decades. Enough to erase the bus station, the bench, the silence. For a moment, she didn't breathe. Then she noticed something else. Tucked behind the contract. A single photograph. Black and white. Faded. The villa. Years ago. And standing in front of it, a man she didn't recognize. Eleanor narrowed her eyes. "This is who built you," she whispered. She turned back to the journal, flipping through pages faster now. Searching. Matching. Then she found it. An entry. Short. Controlled. If they return before the system is understood, the final archive must remain inaccessible. Eleanor froze. Final archive. She looked back at the drawings. The empty space beneath the floor. The patterns she had only begun to follow. "They're not here for the documents I found," she said slowly. Her voice tightened. "They're here for what I haven't reached yet." Outside, a car door shut. Closer this time. Eleanor stood still. Not panicking. Focused. "They think I'll take the money," she said. A faint, almost invisible smile touched her lips. "They think I'll leave before I understand." The floor beneath her creaked, soft, controlled. Not from age, but from shift. A signal, not random. Eleanor stepped back slowly, her eyes tracing the lines from the drawings, matching them to the room. The chair, the table, the light, her position. "This isn't about finding something hidden," she said. Her voice was calm now, certain. "It's about becoming the person it opens for." Another shift. this time beneath her feet. Subtle, precise. Eleanor didn't move away. She stood there, exactly where she was meant to stand. Outside, footsteps approached the door. Closer. Inside, the house responded. Not with noise, not with fear, but with recognition. Eleanor Whitaker closed her eyes for a brief moment and made her decision. I'm not leaving, she said softly. Not to them, not even to the house, but to herself. Because this wasn't about surviving anymore. It wasn't even about proving them wrong. It was about something far quieter, far stronger. For the first time in her life, Eleanor wasn't trying to hold on to what was taken from her. She was choosing to uncover what had been hidden and refusing to let it be erased again. The final offer didn't come with an envelope. It came with a table. Eleanor knew before she opened the door that this time would be different. There was no hesitation in the knock, no uncertainty in the footsteps outside. When she pulled the door open, Daniel Cross stood there again, alone, composed, as if everything that had happened before was simply negotiation. May I come in? He asked. Eleanor studied him for a long moment. Then she stepped aside. 5 minutes, she said. He entered without looking around. That was the first difference. The others had measured the space, noted its angles, its silence. Daniel didn't. He already knew what mattered. I appreciate you taking the time, he said, placing a slim briefcase on the table. Eleanor remained standing. I didn't, she replied. You came anyway. A faint smile touched his lips. That's fair. He opened the briefcase. Inside, documents. Clean. Final. And beneath them, stacks. Neatly arranged. Undeniable. Eleanor didn't step closer. Didn't look away. This is more than generous, Daniel said. It reflects not just the property, but the inconvenience this situation has caused you. Inconvenience, Eleanor repeated softly. He didn't react. You've seen enough by now to understand the complexity of what's involved here, he continued. There are layers, legal, historical, issues that would take years to resolve. Eleanor's voice was calm. I'm not in a hurry. Daniel closed the briefcase halfway. Not defensive. Adjusting. You don't need to be part of that process, he said. You can walk away from it. Cleanly. Securely. Eleanor took a slow step forward now, resting her hand lightly on the back of the chair. The same chair. The same position. The light from the window fell across the table, precisely where it had before. You've been here before, she said quietly. Daniel's eyes flickered just once. Excuse me. You knew where to stand, she said. Where to place that. Her gaze dropped briefly to the briefcase. Then back to him. You tried to open it. Silence. Not empty. Measured. Daniel straightened slightly. We've studied the property, he said. That's not what I asked, Eleanor replied. He held her gaze. Then after a moment, no, he said. We didn't succeed. Eleanor nodded once. I know. A shift moved through the room, subtle, almost imperceptible. Daniel didn't notice. Eleanor did. You're offering me money, she said, her voice steady. But you're not buying the house. Daniel didn't respond. You're buying what you couldn't unlock, she continued. What you couldn't understand. He closed the briefcase completely now. The conversation had changed. Let's not make this more complicated than it needs to be, he said. You've done something unexpected. I respect that. Eleanor's expression didn't change. But you don't belong here, he added. That landed differently. Not as an insult, as a belief. Eleanor looked around the room. The chair, the table, the light that had guided her without force. Then back at him. I didn't belong anywhere, she said quietly. Her voice didn't break. It was held. Daniel softened his tone. That doesn't have to be your story anymore, he said. Take the offer. Start over somewhere that makes sense. Eleanor almost smiled. Somewhere that makes sense, she repeated. She stepped closer to the table now. Close enough to see the reflection of the light across the polished surface of the briefcase. Close enough to touch it. But she didn't. You think this is about money, she said. It is about resolution, Daniel replied. Eleanor shook her head slowly. No, she said. It's about silence. He exhaled. You're making a mistake. Eleanor met his gaze fully now. Not hesitant, not uncertain. You think I survived all that, she said softly, to disappear quietly? The words settled between them. Heavy. Final. Daniel didn't argue. because there was nothing left to adjust, no angle left to try. Eleanor stepped back from the table. The decision had already been made, not in this moment, but long before it. Take it, she said, nodding toward the briefcase. I won't. Daniel stood still for a moment longer. Then he closed the case, lifted it, and turned toward the door. He paused at the threshold. This isn't over, he said. Eleanor didn't move. I know, she replied. The door closed behind him. Silence returned, but not the same silence as before. This one was earned. Eleanor stood alone in the room, her eyes drifting slowly to the floor beneath her, to the place the drawings had marked, to the space she hadn't yet reached. They were never going to stop, she said quietly. A soft shift answered beneath her feet. Deeper this time. Closer. Eleanor closed her eyes briefly, not in doubt, but in clarity, because this was no longer about what they wanted, or what they feared. This was about what the house had been waiting to give. And for the first time, there was nothing left standing between her and the truth, except the final step she had chosen not to run from. The final door didn't open when Eleanor pushed it. It opened when she stopped trying. She stood exactly where the drawings had led her, the center of the room, aligned with the chair, the window, the path of the light that had guided her since the first morning. The house had already shown her everything it needed to. Now it was waiting for one thing she hadn't given yet. Stillness. Eleanor exhaled slowly and let her hands rest at her sides. I'm not here to take anything, she said quietly. The words settled into the structure around her, not as a command, but as truth. I'm here to understand. For a moment, nothing changed. Then, a deep, quiet shift moved beneath her feet. Not loud, not dramatic, but final. The floor separated along a seam so precise it might have been invisible minutes before. A narrow section lowered just enough to reveal a hidden passage beneath the house. Not a basement, not a storage space. Something older on purpose. Eleanor stepped forward. No hesitation now, only recognition. The passage led down into a room carved directly into the foundation, stone-lined, dry, preserved with the same careful intention as everything above. A single table stood at the center, and on it, not gold, not cash, not anything the men outside had come for. Files, dozens of them, bound, labeled, documented. Names, dates, signatures, entire lives recorded, then erased. Eleanor moved closer, her breath steady but heavy. She opened the nearest file. Property transfers, legal overrides, forced removals masked as procedural corrections. The same pattern, again and again. They didn't just take this house, she whispered. They took all of them. Her fingers tightened slightly on the paper. This wasn't about one villa. It never had been. At the far edge of the table sat a small recording device. Old, mechanical, waiting. Eleanor pressed the button. A voice filled the room, clear, controlled, deliberate. If you are hearing this, then the house has been chosen correctly. Eleanor's breath caught, not in fear, but in recognition of something long prepared. This structure was never meant to protect wealth. It was built to protect the truth. The voice paused, then continued. They will try to buy it. If they cannot, they will try to erase it again. But they cannot access what they do not understand. Eleanor closed her eyes briefly. They never listened, she said softly. The house does not open to force. It opens to those who know what it means to lose everything and still remain. Silence followed. Not empty, complete. Eleanor stood there for a long moment, surrounded by what had been hidden, preserved, and denied. Not for profit, not for power, but for someone who would not walk away. They thought I'd sell it, she said quietly. Her voice was steady now, certain. She gathered the files carefully, not rushing, not panicking. Each document is placed back with purpose, not hidden again, protected. When she stepped back into the main room, the light had shifted. Softer now, warmer. Eleanor walked to the door and opened it. The road beyond was empty. The cars were gone, but she knew they would return. She didn't close the door. Later that afternoon, she heard footsteps again, slower this time, uncertain. A woman stood at the edge of the path, older, worn, carrying everything she owned in a single bag. She hesitated when she saw Eleanor. "I'm sorry," the woman said quickly. "I didn't mean to. I just needed somewhere to sit for a while." Eleanor looked at her, really looked, not in the bag, not at the exhaustion, but at the quiet dignity still holding her upright. "You can stay," Eleanor said. The woman blinked. "I don't have anything to give." Eleanor stepped aside, opening the door wider. "You don't need to," she replied. The woman hesitated, then stepped forward, carefully, like someone entering a place that might still reject her. Eleanor watched as she crossed the threshold. The house remained still, but not silent. "Just one thing," Eleanor added gently. The woman turned. "Don't rush it," Eleanor said. "It takes time to understand a place like this." The woman nodded slowly. As the door remained open behind them, the light settled into the room once more, precise, intentional, waiting. Eleanor Whitaker stood inside a house no one wanted, holding something no one could buy, because the Real inheritance was never the villa. It was the truth that refused to be erased, and the quiet strength to stay long enough to bring it back into the light.